Protagonist, Marcus Ellison, mid-40s, a black man, once a brilliant corporate strategist, Harvard MBA, and decorated Army veteran. After the sudden death of his wife and a series of predatory medical bills, Marcus spiraled into homelessness in his small southern town. Despite his situation, he maintains dignity, cleaning up daily at a local shelter, mentoring black teenagers in math, and volunteering at a community garden. Tone, quiet resilience. He carries himself with grace, though people avert their eyes. He reads financial journals in the library, still sharpening his mind. Moments of joy, bonding with neighborhood kids, exchanging stories with other unhoused men, and singing old jazz records in the shelter kitchen. His humanity shines despite society's indifference. Marcus seeks work daily, facing subtle and overt racism. Employers glance at his clothes and dismiss him. Marcus quietly begins gathering evidence of corruption, how Wentworth Company manipulates zoning, evicts families, and launders campaign donations. Reveal a background or inner strength. At a heated town hall where Wentworth dismisses resident concerns, Marcus calmly steps forward. Dressed plainly, the crowd assumes he's powerless. Then he speaks with precision, citing case law, corporate ethics, and economic analysis. The reveal lands. He's a Harvard-educated strategist and decorated veteran. He produces old credentials, Harvard diploma, military commendations, Wall Street accolades. Marcus quietly begins gathering evidence of corruption, how Wentworth Company manipulates zoning, evicts families, and launders campaign donations. Reveal a background or inner strength. At a heated town hall where Wentworth dismisses resident concerns, Marcus calmly steps forward. Dressed plainly, the crowd assumes he's powerless. Then he speaks with precision, citing case law, corporate ethics, and economic analysis. The reveal lands. He's a Harvard-educated strategist and decorated veteran. He produces old credentials, Harvard diploma, military commendations, Wall Street accolades. Gasps ripple through the audience. Wentworth looks shaken. The man he mocked holds more intellectual and moral authority than anyone in the room. A young journalist records Marcus's speech. It goes viral. Homeless man outsmarts CEO at town hall. Local black churches rally. Students he mentored speak out. Media crews arrive, framing Marcus as the face of resilience and injustice. Some backlash surfaces. Smears against his past. Whispers of, if he's so smart, why is he homeless? He faces both newfound support and new dangers. Marcus works with a coalition of civil rights lawyers, activists, and investigative reporters. They uncover Wentworth corruption, illegal lobbying, bribery of officials, and falsified contracts. Marcus, with his strategist mind, coordinates a case like a battlefield campaign, meticulous, strategic, and relentless. The shelter's survival becomes the frontline symbol of resistance. In a packed courtroom, Wentworth's attorneys attempt to dismiss Marcus as unstable and unreliable. Marcus remains calm, dismantling their narrative with hard evidence. He presents financial records and testimonies, revealing systemic corruption. The judge, visibly moved, silences Wentworth when he tries to laugh Marcus off again. Final blow. Marcus delivers a speech on dignity, justice, and the hypocrisy of a system that equates wealth with worth. Wentworth is indicted, his redevelopment project halted. The shelter and surrounding community are protected under a new housing justice initiative. Marcus declines offers to profit from a media frenzy. Instead, he accepts a role as a community economic advisor, creating job pathways for the underserved. Closing scene. Marcus sitting in the garden with neighborhood kids, laughing as he teaches them chess. His duffel bag is gone. In its place, books, plans, and hope. Justice isn't about what you own. It's about what you stand for, even when the world tries to strip you of everything. The morning light spilled unevenly through the high windows of the shelter, painting long bars of pale gold across the cracked linoleum floor. Marcus Ellison sat at one of the tables near the corner, a cup of weak coffee cooling in front of him, his posture upright despite the weary weight of another sleepless night. His clothes were worn but clean, pressed the best he could manage with the shelter's old iron. He moved with a kind of quiet precision, the same discipline that had once carried him through boardrooms and battlefields alike. To the volunteers, He was just another man holding on. But to those who watched carefully, the children he tutored after school, the few who spoke with him in hushed tones, he radiated a dignity that didn't fit the tattered duffel bag by his feet. On the bench across from him, a boy no older than 12 squinted at a sheet of math problems. Marcus leaned forward, his voice soft but steady. "You're overthinking it, Jamal. Look here. When you break the numbers down, it's like music. It flows." He sketched a quick example on the paper, his handwriting sharp, deliberate. Jamal's eyes lit up, catching the rhythm Marcus spoke of. The boy grinned and Marcus chuckled, a sound rare but genuine, as though escape from somewhere deep he thought had long been locked away. Around them, the shelter hummed with the low murmur of survival. Coffee poured, bread toasted. People exchanging murmured gratitude or gruff silence. Outside, car engines roared and the town moved on, most citizens never glancing at the building that housed the forgotten. Yet Marcus carried himself as though he were not forgotten at all, but waiting. Later, he walked to the public library, duffel slung over one shoulder. The air was sharp with autumn, leaves crunching underfoot. Inside, at a corner table, he unfolded a copy of the Wall Street Journal. His fingers traced the graphs, eyes narrowing at the numbers. To anyone passing, he was a homeless man loitering. But inside his mind, calculation spun. He had once built strategies that shifted corporations, and now, though stripped of title and wealth, he still sharpened his blade quietly, privately. Every day, he made the same small pilgrimage: shelter, library, garden. At the community garden tucked between two crumbling warehouses, Marcus found solace. Kneeling among rows of collard greens and tomatoes, he coaxed life from the soil with the same patience he used to guide Jamal through algebra. Older women from the neighborhood greeted him warmly, offering gossip, food, or prayers. Here, at least, he wasn't invisible. In the evenings, when the sun melted into long shadows across the town's brick streets, Marcus would sit alone on the shelter steps, a dog-eared notebook in his lap. He scribbled plans, sketches of affordable housing initiatives, ideas for mentorship programs, policy notes scrawled like blueprints for a city no one else could yet see. His handwriting bore the precision of a man who refused to let his mind decay, even if the world decided he no longer mattered. But when the night grew quiet, the mask sometimes slipped. His gaze would drift, unfocused, toward the horizon. He remembered the townhouse he once owned, the wife whose laughter still haunted him, the Harvard halls where his mind soared, the war zones where his discipline was forged. All gone, stripped by grief, by predatory systems, by the slow erosion of dignity that homelessness enforces like a sentence. Yet even in those moments, he did not crumble. He inhaled, folded the notebook shut, and rose with a soldier's steadiness. Tomorrow, there would be work to do, if not for himself, then for the children who still looked at him like he was more than what the world saw. The town civic center buzzed with strange, rehearsed optimism, the kind that coated its marble lobby like wax, polished, cold, impersonal. Flyers for the Wentworth Development Job Fair littered the front doors, promising opportunity and renewal in bold letters. A brass banner stretched across the entrance, building tomorrow together. Marcus stood at the threshold, shoulders squared, his duffel bag gripped loosely in one hand. He had shaved that morning, the careful scrape of a dull razor leaving his jawline clean, if not smooth. His shirt, pressed into the fabric side, bore faint signs of its age, but was tucked neatly into his trousers. He looked like a man determined to be seen for more than his circumstances. Inside, the air smelled faintly of perfume, paper, and catered finger foods. Rows of booths gleamed with corporate logos. Recruiters in tailored suits spoke in measured, cheerful tones to a crowd of mostly young, mostly white applicants clutching polished resumes. Marcus walked slowly between the rows, absorbing the scene. His eyes lingered on a banner showing the skyline of the town before and after redevelopment. The before shot was familiar, murals painted by black artists, mom-and-pop shops with hand-painted signs. The after was glass towers and cafes with French names. From the stage at the far end of the hall, Charles Wentworth III held court. The CEO's smile was all teeth and calculation, his voice booming with the easy arrogance of a man unchallenged. "This town is on the brink of transformation," he declared, his words spilling like champagne for an eager crowd. We will create jobs, foster innovation, and raise the standard of living for everyone. The audience clapped, though the word everyone rang hollow rehearsed. Marcus moved closer, heart steady. He stood the line for Wentworth's booth, where young professionals were shaking hands, exchanging cards, their futures trading hands like currency. When Marcus stepped forward, the recruiter's smile faltered almost imperceptibly, a flicker of unease as her eyes slid from his pressed shirt to the duffel at his side. Still, Marcus greeted her with a warm, steady voice. "Good morning. I'd like to inquire about employment opportunities," he said, extending his hand. Before she could answer, Wentworth himself appeared, descending from the stage like a king among subjects. His eyes landed on Marcus with the faintest spark of amusement. "Well," he said loudly, drawing the attention of those nearby, "looks like we're broadening our applicant pool." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Marcus didn't flinch. His hand remained outstretched, steady. "I have experience in corporate strategy," Marcus replied calmly. "Operations, logistics, financial modeling. I believe I could be of use." Wentworth chuckled, the sound low and dismissive. "Corporate strategy? With that?" He gestured vaguely toward Marcus's worn duffel, his voice slicing through the hall. "My friend, the soup kitchen is down the street. That's where you'll find work." The laughter this time was louder, crueler. Recruiters glanced at each other with smirks, and one security guard began walking closer. A few applicants looked uncomfortable, shifting in their shoes, but no one spoke up. Marcus's eyes met Wentworth's. Calm, unblinking. In that silence, a quiet dignity pushed back against the jeers. "I'm not here for charity," he said, voice even. "I'm here to contribute." Wentworth leaned closer, his smile dripping with condescension. "You've already contributed, sir. You've contributed enough by showing us all what failure looks like." The guard's hand brushed Marcus's arm. "Time to move along," he muttered. Marcus allowed himself to be guided toward the door. He didn't resist, didn't raise his voice. But as he walked out, his back straight against the tide of humiliation, his eyes scanned the glossy posters one last time. Behind the marketing slogans, he saw the truth. This wasn't a job fair. It was a land grab dressed up in opportunities clothing. And if Wentworth was the man holding the keys, Marcus understood that the battle ahead would not be fought with fists or fury. It would be fought with patience, precision, and truth. The humiliation at the job fair spread quietly through town like a whisper carried on wind. A local blogger had caught a fragment of the exchange on her phone, a grainy clip of Marcus standing tall, hand extended, while Wentworth mocked him to the delight of the crowd. The video never made it to the evening news, but in the corners of the community where Marcus's name was already known, it stung. Children he tutored heard classmates repeating the story, twisting it into something cruel. "Your teacher tried to get a job," they sneered, and they told him to go back to the soup kitchen. Marcus didn't respond when Jamal, red-eyed and ashamed, told him about it. Instead, he pressed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "Remember this, Jamal. The world will try to measure you by the smallest thing it can see. Don't let them. You define you." His voice was steady, but that night, Marcus's own reflection in the shelter's cracked mirror seemed to challenge him. His shoulders felt heavier, his resolve tested. Weeks passed. Wentworth's company announced its plan to purchase the block where the shelter stood. The glossy renderings showed affordable loft apartments and artisan eateries, but Marcus knew what it meant. Displacement. Families with nowhere to go. His home, if one could call the shelter that, would be bulldozed to make way for profit. At the town council meeting, residents gathered in folding chairs beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Mothers with tired eyes clutched toddlers, elders leaned on canes, and young activists scribbled notes. Marcus sat quietly in the back, duffel at his feet, listening. Wentworth arrived late, his suit gleaming under the cheap lights. He shook hands with council members as though the outcome was already decided. When the floor opened for public comment, voices trembled with frustration. A mother describing how her children depended on the shelter's meals, an old man warning that his pension wouldn't stretch to the rent Wentworth's new housing promised. Each plea seemed to bounce off the polished wall of Wentworth's indifference. Finally, Marcus stood. The room quieted. He didn't rush to the podium, but walked with deliberate calm. His voice, when it filled the hall, was low but carried weight. "Displacement is not progress," he began. "Destroying a shelter is not development. You speak of opportunity, Mr. Wentworth, but whose opportunity are we talking about?" Wentworth's lips curled into that same thin smile. "Sir, with respect, revitalization benefits everyone." And frankly, he let his eyes sweep Marcus's frame, pausing deliberately on the duffel. "If a man such as yourself has not managed to, how shall I put, lift himself up, perhaps the problem is not the system. Perhaps it is the man." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he did not lash back. His voice remained steady, each word sharp with restraint. "You mistake circumstance for character, and you mistake power for truth." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience, but before Marcus could continue, the council chair interrupted, tapping the gavel. "Time is limited. Please wrap it up." Marcus nodded once, returning to his seat. His dignity was intact, but the humiliation was fresh, echoing. After the meeting, 2 uniformed officers approached him outside the Civic Center. Their tone was polite, but their questions were not. "We've had complaints." One said, "Some folks think you've been loitering, wandering around businesses, making people uncomfortable." Marcus blinked. "You mean walking to the library? To the garden?" "Just answering calls, sir. You fit the description." The phrase landed heavy. Fit the description. Always the same, never specific. They didn't arrest him. They didn't have to. The message was clear. Stay small, stay silent. The shadow of authority hung over him like a warning. But as Marcus walked back to the shelter, his steps slow against the cooling pavement. Something in him solidified. They had tried to humiliate him in public. They had threatened to erase his shelter, his community, his very presence. The injustice was no longer personal. It was systemic, sharpened against every vulnerable person in town. And Marcus knew then, silence was no longer an option. If they saw him as invisible, he would make himself undeniable. The second town hall was standing room only. Word had spread after the first meeting. About Wentworth's sneer, about Marcus's calm rebuttal, about the police officers waiting outside. By now, whispers swirled through the community. Who was he, really? Some said he had been a professor, others a soldier. Most only knew him as the quiet man at the shelter who carried himself too proudly for the label of homeless. The air inside the hall was thick with anticipation. Folding chairs scraped the linoleum as neighbors crammed in, the buzz of conversation swelling until the gavel fell. Wentworth was already at the front, beaming like a politician in control of his stage. He gestured to a glossy presentation. Slides of towers, clean parks, and storefronts with names no one in town could pronounce. His words dripped with rehearsed optimism. When the council opened the floor again, Marcus rose from the back. He moved slowly but with a deliberate calm, the duffel slung across his shoulder like a soldier carrying a pack. The chatter quieted. This time, people leaned in. At the podium, he rested his hand on the wood, steadying himself. His voice began soft, the same tone he used when guiding Jamal through algebra problems. "I've listened," he said. "I've watched as men like Mr. Wentworth tell this community what's good for it, what progress looks like. And I've been told to my face that I am what failure looks like." His eyes swept the room, not accusing, but anchoring. "So perhaps you should know who you're talking to." From his duffel, Marcus drew out a worn leather folder. The council members shifted uneasily as he opened it. The first page, his Harvard diploma, the seal still gleaming faintly beneath the plastic cover. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I graduated from Harvard Business School in 1997. Marcus continued, voice steady but louder now. "Top of my class in strategic management. I was recruited to Wall Street before some of these corporations even knew this town's name. I advised Fortune 500 companies on restructuring, risk assessment, growth strategies. For years, I built the kind of wealth Mr. Wentworth flaunts on these slides." He turned another page. Photographs of him in uniform, army fatigues, standing beside fellow soldiers in desert heat. Another murmur swelled in the room. I also served this country, twice deployed overseas. I commanded logistics operations that fed thousands of troops. I came home with medals I don't wear, because medals don't feed families when hospitals drain your savings and corporations treat grief like weakness. His voice wavered for just a heartbeat, the shadow of his wife's memory passing through him, before he steadied again. I lost more than money. I lost my home. But I did not lose my mind. I did not lose my discipline. And I will not lose my dignity because a man with a suit and a microphone decides to call me a beggar. The hall erupted, voices rising, some clapping, others shouting in agreement. Cameras flashed, local journalists capturing the moment. Even council members shifted, their practiced neutrality cracking under the weight of the revelation. Wentworth's smile faltered, the mask slipping. He leaned toward his microphone, voice sharp. Credentials don't erase reality. You are still a homeless man. Standing here demanding the world owe you something. Marcus turned, locking eyes with him. No, Mr. Wentworth. I'm reminding you that this town owes itself something: truth, dignity, fairness. You build towers. I build people. One of us is disposable. And it isn't me. The applause thundered. For the first time, Wentworth seemed unsettled, his confidence chipped by a man he'd mocked in front of everyone. And though Marcus felt the tremor of his own pulse in his chest, he stood straighter, no longer invisible. His past had been weaponized against him, but now it was his shield and his sword. By the next morning, Marcus's speech was everywhere. The clip taken on a shaky phone camera had been uploaded to a local blog, then picked up by regional outlets hungry for human drama. Within hours, it spread further. Hashtags carrying his name, his image at the podium, his Harvard diploma in hand, his voice cutting through Wentworth's smirk like a blade. The homeless Harvard strategist. That's what they called him now, though Marcus never used the phrase himself. At the shelter, the television flickered with his face, grainy and yet commanding. Some of the men around him clapped, slapping him on the back, while others sat in silence, disbelief mixing with pride. That's you, man, one said, shaking his head. That's really you. Marcus only nodded, lips pressed tight. He knew how swiftly attention could turn from applause to ridicule. But when Jamal burst in, eyes shining, clutching a printout of Marcus's photograph from the news, Marcus felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. The weight of responsibility, but also the spark of possibility. Across town, Wentworth was furious. In a slick office overlooking the very blocks he planned to erase, he barked orders to his staff. Get ahead of this. Discredit him. If he's homeless, he's unstable. If he's unstable, he's unreliable. Find something, anything. A bankruptcy, an arrest, a hospital record. I don't care. His voice cut to the glass walls, echoing like commandment. The smear campaign began almost immediately. Anonymous articles questioned Marcus's mental health. Pundits on conservative radio scoffed. If he's such a genius, why is he living in a shelter? The implication was clear. Harvard or not, black or poor, the system had already decided where Marcus belonged. But support came just as swiftly. A coalition of pastors invited him to speak at their church. College students organized rallies, chanting his name outside City Hall. A local journalist, young and restless, approached Marcus at the library with a recorder. I want to tell your story, she said. The real one, not the sound bites. Marcus studied her, searching her eyes for spectacle or pity. He found only determination. At last, he agreed. Her article, long, deeply reported, unveiled Wentworth's empire, the shady contracts, the campaign donations disguised as community grants, the eviction notices sent at midnight. Paired with Marcus's voice, it spread like fire. National outlets picked it up, framing the narrative as David versus Goliath, intellect versus arrogance, dignity versus greed. The attention brought allies Marcus had not expected. A former colleague from his Wall Street days emailed, offering pro bono consulting. A veterans group reached out, recognizing his name from service records. Lawyers from a civil rights firm called late into the night, their voices crackling to the shelter's landline. The group murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Marcus leaned forward, tapping his pen against the table. Follow the contracts, he said. His tone was calm, commanding. Not just the money. Wentworth hides his power in paper. Zoning changes, tax breaks, land swaps. If we can show a pattern, we don't just stop him here. We prove systemic abuse. The room quieted. For a moment, the lawyer and activist looked at him not as a man from the shelter, but as a strategist he once was. A man who knew how to map battlefields. Only this time, the battlefield was bureaucracy. Over the following weeks, Marcus worked tirelessly. By day, he still mentored kids in the library, still dug into the soil at the garden. But by night, in that church basement, he pored over documents with the same relentless focus he once used to craft corporate mergers. His duffel bag became a mobile archive, stuffed with zoning ordinances, eviction notices, meeting transcripts. Every scrap of evidence mattered. Angela often caught herself staring at him during these sessions. How he spoke with patience, how he dismantled complex legal jargon into strategies that everyone at the table could grasp. He never raised his voice. He never sought the spotlight. Yet his calm presence pulled people into alignment. Meanwhile, Wentworth fought back in his way. Billboards appeared across town. Wentworth builds futures. Local radio ran ads touting his generosity. And yet, for every polished slogan, Marcus and his allies unearthed another crack in facade. A family forced from their home without notice. A business owner strong-armed into selling at half value. Then came the breakthrough. In a box of records nearly forgotten in the county clerk's office, Marcus discovered a signed letter. Wentworth personally pressuring a council member to approve a zoning deal in exchange for campaign funds. The signature was bold, arrogant, undeniable. Marcus traced it with his finger, the edges of his mouth tightening. "This is it," he murmured. Angela looked over his shoulder, her eyes widening. "This ties him directly. It's not just corruption, it's criminal." The team erupted in quiet cheers, but Marcus remained steady, folding the letter carefully into his folder. He knew the battle wasn't over. Wentworth's money bought silence, influence, fear. But this was leverage, a crack in the armor. That night, walking back to the shelter under the glow of a single streetlight, Marcus felt the weight of what they carried. He was still a man with no house, still mocked in whispers, still targeted. And yet, in his duffel, he carried the kind of truth that could topple empires. He passed a corner store, where 2 officers lingered in their cruiser, watching him. He met their gaze without flinching. Not defiant, not submissive, simply unyielding. For the first time in years, Marcus felt not like a man surviving, but like a man advancing. The courthouse of Greenwood was packed to the walls, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with tension and the faint buzz of cameras. Reporters lined the aisles, microphones poised. Townsfolk craned their necks from the gallery, some clutching worn church fans, others clutching each other's hands. They had come to see the showdown between the man who owned half the town and the man who, until recently, had slept on its benches. At the front, behind a long oak table, Marcus sat in a borrowed navy suit. It wasn't new, creased at the shoulders, slightly loose, but the dignity with which he wore it gave it weight. His hands rested on the table, fingers interlaced, calm. On the other side, George Wentworth leaned back in his chair, crisp-tailored suit gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His lawyer whispered into his ear, but Wentworth barely listened, lips curled into a faint smirk. The judge entered, and silence fell. The gavel struck once, echoing like a drumbeat. Angela rose, moving to the center of the courtroom floor. Her voice was clear, steady. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, today we present not just a case of corruption, but a betrayal. Betrayal of the public trust, of families displaced from their homes, of children forced from their schools. And all for profit funneled into one man's pocket." She clicked a button, and the projector lit up with documents. The shell companies, the zoning maps, the campaign donations. The evidence unfolded piece by piece, like a puzzle snapping into place. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as connections became undeniable. Wentworth's attorney objected, argued, blustered. But every time, Angela countered with quiet precision, her tone sharpened by truth. Then came the moment. Angela pulled out a file, walked to Marcus, and placed it in his hands. He rose slowly, his every movement deliberate, and carried the paper to the stand. The room hushed as Marcus adjusted the microphone. His voice, when it came, was low but steady, carrying weight far beyond volume. "I found this letter in the county archives." He began. He held it up. "Wentworth's letter, signed in bold ink. It is a directive from Mr. Wentworth to a council member, promising campaign funds in exchange for a zoning vote that forced 30 families out of their homes. I was one of those families. I watched the community uprooted because profit meant more than people." His eyes flicked toward Wentworth, then back to the judge. "For years, I thought losing my home, losing my place, made me less of a man. I carried that shame. But I see now it wasn't failure. It was theft. It was betrayal, sanctioned by power and paper." The gallery stirred. Some gasped, some wept silently. Wentworth shifted, his smirk faltering as Marcus continued. "I have been laughed at. I have been called less than. I have slept in shelters while this man built an empire off the backs of people like me. But I stand here today not as a victim, but as proof that truth survives, even when men like him try to bury it." Angela displayed the signature side by side with other official documents. Wentworth's name, the same flourish, the same arrogance. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Wentworth, how you explain this?" Wentworth's lawyer scrambled, objected again, called it circumstantial. But his client's face betrayed him, sweat beading on his forehead, jaw tight. The mask of superiority cracked under the weight of evidence. Cameras clicked furiously. Reporters whispered into recorders. The crowd was electric, as if the whole town inhaled at once, waiting for fall. And then it came. The judge's gavel struck, sharp and final. "This court will be recommending criminal charges. The evidence is overwhelming. Mr. Wentworth, you'll be remanded for further proceedings." Gasps erupted. The once untouchable Titan sat frozen, his power unraveling before hundreds of eyes. Officers approached him for the first time. Wentworth looked small, his shoulders caving as cuffs snapped around his wrists. Marcus sat back down, exhaling slowly. He did not smile. He did not gloat. His gaze was steady, almost mournful, as if he understood the gravity of what had just shifted. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced in that town. In the gallery, a child Marcus had mentored in the library tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered, "That's him. That's the man who stood up." The gavel struck again. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a wave of release, a town shaking off chains that had bound it for decades. And Marcus, sitting quietly amidst the storm, felt the weight of his duffel bag ease, as if the truths he carried for so long finally belonged to the world. The courthouse steps glistened under the afternoon sun. Reporters swarmed like bees, their microphones thrust forward, their questions flying in sharp bursts. But Marcus moved slowly through the crowd, shoulders straight, eyes steady, Angela at his side. He answered nothing, his silence more powerful than words. The cameras caught every moment. The man who had once been invisible, dismissed as a nuisance on a park bench, now walking out as a figure who had unmasked the most powerful man in Greenwood. As they reached the bottom of the steps, the townsfolk began to gather around him. An older woman in a faded church hat pressed his hand in both of hers, tears sliding down her cheeks. "We thought nobody would ever stand up to him," she whispered. A young man in a work uniform clapped Marcus on the back, his eyes bright with pride. Mothers lifted children onto their hips, pointing him out like a storybook hero come to life. For the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to breathe deeply. The air felt different, lighter, charged with possibility. Not because the fight was over, but because the silence had finally been broken. That night, the town came alive in ways Marcus hadn't seen since he was a boy. The little church on Maple Street opened its doors, and neighbors poured in, carrying casseroles, cornbread, fried chicken. Voices rose in songs that hadn't been sung in years, hymns of endurance, freedom, and faith. Children darted between the pews, laughter bouncing off the stained glass windows. Marcus sat in the back for a long while, watching, listening. Angela found him there, nudging his shoulder gently. "They're waiting for you, you know." "I've never been much for speeches," he said, almost shyly. "Doesn't matter," she replied. "Sometimes just standing is the speech." So he did. He rose and walked slowly to the front. The room quieted, hundreds of eyes turning to him. For a moment, he felt the weight of all the years pressing down. The benches he'd slept on, the nights he'd gone hungry, the laughter he'd endured when they saw only a homeless man. And then he felt something else. The warmth of every face looking back, no longer with pity, but with respect. "I don't have much to say," Marcus began, his voice carrying softly through the church. "But I'll tell you this. What happened today wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. Every person who ever thought they had no voice. Every family that was told to move on because someone richer wanted what was theirs. Today they heard us." Applause erupted, but Marcus lifted a hand, quieting it. His eyes swept the crowd, settling on the children sitting cross-legged near the altar. "And to the young ones, don't you ever let anyone tell you you're less than. You carry dignity inside you, no matter what they try to take from you. They can laugh, they can push you down, but if you hold on to the truth, one day it'll rise, just like it did today." The room rose to its feet, clapping, singing again. The walls shook with sound, but Marcus stood quietly humbled, as if the celebration belonged more to the people than to him. Later that night, he walked home through the streets of Greenwood, no longer just a passerby, but a man whose story was now part of the town's history. Street lamps flicker overhead, casting long shadows. He carried nothing but his old duffel bag, though now it felt different, lighter, empty to shame, heavy only with memory. As he reached the bench where he had once spent countless nights, Marcus paused. He sat down, looking out at the quiet street. The wood was worn, the paint chipped, but tonight it didn't feel like exile. It felt like testament, proof that a man could fall to the lowest point and still rise with his dignity intact. In the distance, church bells began to ring, and Marcus, sitting beneath the soft glow of the lamp, let a faint smile tug at the corner of his lips. He had not just reclaimed his own name, he had changed Greenwood. And though tomorrow would bring new battles, new injustices to confront, tonight belonged to the quiet triumph of a man who refused to be erased. Generate an ultra-realistic 16:9 YouTube thumbnail image, showing a dramatic racial injustice scene. A black man in worn but dignified clothes is standing in front of a CEO's polished mahogany desk inside a sleek corporate office. The white CEO is leaning back in his chair, laughing mockingly, pointing at the man with cruel amusement. The black man's expression shows quiet shock and hurt, his hands gripping the strap of an old duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The background should include floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city skyline, symbolizing wealth and power. Bright, cinematic lighting highlights the contrast between the CEO's smug face and the man's silent dignity. Add bold yellow and white caption text in the top corner. "You? Work here? Never." The overall tone should be raw, humiliating, and emotionally intense, perfect for a viral thumbnail about racism and injustice.